Welcome to Rome. This is The Bittersweet Life with Katie Sewell and Tiffany Parks. Hello, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Now, last week we kicked off our season number 10, but this week we're actually going to mark the occasion by...
That's right.
Doing what? Well, musing on why anybody would do anything for 10 seasons. Or, better yet, other things that lasted for 10 seasons. And also, just how short and how long a season and a lifetime can feel. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just riffing here. Tiffany is in Rome. I am in Seattle. And this is the official 10-year season kickoff in my mind. Tiffany, you were looking up other famous things that lasted for 10 seasons. So why don't we just start there?
Well, really just sitcoms that I grew up with. So I noticed that Friends lasted for 10 seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And, Seinfeld a little less. Seinfeld lasted 9 seasons. And I guess because these are the shows I grew up with, they feel like they were endless,
Yeah.
It didn't feel like they lasted only as long as this show has lasted.
Yeah, and I don't know how many seasons MASH lasted for, but just
Well,
recently...
I can look it up.
Look it up. A couple weeks ago, it was noted that MASH was celebrating its 50 years since it first went on the air. And because I can remember MASH and when it went off the air, I was really like, 50 years?
You were tiny.
That's how long ago MASH actually started?
It was 11 seasons.
Okay.
So you would have been a very small child when it went off the air. What were you doing watching MASH at 6 years old, Katie?
I don't think I was watching MASH. I'm sure that I was more just picking up on, I don't know, the image of Alan Alda. I can't imagine that it was any more than that. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned it on this show, Tiffany. I'm sure you know that I grew up with only antenna television, and the only channel that we happened to pick up with our antenna was CBS. So my entire childhood was limited to Murder, She Wrote, 60 Minutes, Airwolf, and the Oliver North trials.
Katie, I should feel so bad for you right now.
And Billy Graham, I believe, occasionally would pop in.
Oh, and Billy
there.
Graham.
Yeah.
I mean, were there any good sitcoms that a young person would like on CBS? I feel like it was all NBC and ABC.
Yeah, I mean, I can also remember that Dallas was airing, but I don't.
These are
Obviously,
not
my
kids'
mother did
shows.
not let us watch Dallas. I
Well,
loved
no.
Airwolf.
I've never heard of Airwolf.
I mainly liked it for the music, the theme song. I liked to dance around to it. And the family Sunday night ritual was the one night of the week my mom would let us eat dinner on a television tray, which, what a novelty that was. And we'd watch 60 Minutes as a family. The only part I really liked was the commentator at the very end.
I just remember the timer, the ticking timer of that show. I mean, how old were you? Because I just feel like 60 Minutes is a little bit heavy for kids.
I mean, I was an elementary schooler, sometime between first and fourth grade, and then we'd watch Murder, She Wrote after that, and that was the family ritual.
Yeah, because might as well teach your kids young that people get bumped off right and left.
Yes, you've heard the joke that was she really investigating murder, or was she the murderer herself? Because there was always a murder that happened no matter where she was.
Exactly. Well, just like Miss Marple, same deal.
So we've been doing this show for 10 seasons.
We're starting the 10th season right now. So technically we've been doing it for 9 and not quite 9 years. We started taping the show about 9 years minus a couple months ago.
So what else in your life would you say that you have done? Like, when this ends, we will have been doing this for 10 years.
When this season ends.
When this season ends. Whenever that we decide that is. And that could be like tomorrow if we get fed up. but whenever this season ends, we will have done it for approximately 10 years. We would have been hosting this show. Is there anything else that you can think of that you've done for so long?
Well, I've been married for 11 years and a bit.
Okay.
So there's that.
And how would you compare the experience of creating this show to being married?
Wow, Katie, that is a hard one. They both take stamina.
Mm-hmm.
They both take
Dedication, certainly.
dedication and very solid partnerships,
Mm-hmm.
and respect for the person you're working with or living with, as the case may be. But definitely have fought with you less.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have a lot of fights. So
No.
that's true. So
What about you? I mean,
any
I know you've been married for 10 years as well, but
yes. I mean, I did work full time for NPR for the same amount of time as this, if not longer, actually. I think a couple of years longer. I was there full time. I work there occasionally, but yeah, where I was there day in and day out,
yeah.
blood, sweat, and tears, the whole 9 yards. I was there for probably 2 to 3 years longer than what we've done so far.
Now, what feels longer to you, that or this?
Hmm. I mean, neither one of them feels too long, if you know what I mean.
Here's why I asked you that. Because for me, decades do not have the same length, depending on when they happened in your life. For me, the decade of my 20s felt like it was so long, not in a bad way. I just feel like it lasted a long time and I did so much, and it just feels like a very long span of time. Whereas 30 to 40 felt like 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because when you were saying that, I was thinking, okay, let me imagine my first couple days there. And the person that I was the first couple days there, with the energy and excitement that I felt being there, for one, and also how much I had to learn from that point. Because now, of course, I knew how much I had to learn, that there was going to be a huge, long journey to like actually get to where I was by the time I left. And so when I think of the span of that journey, it feels epically long compared to creating this show. But of course, when I think about this show from a location standpoint, like that this started in Rome when I was living there. And since then, I've lived in San Francisco for a few years, moved back and forth around Seattle, did that little stint in New Orleans, came back to Rome twice for extended periods of time. When I think about all the things that happened in between, that makes it feel like this has been going on longer. But
That's true.
it also doesn't
That's true.
feel like it's been almost 10 years since I lived in Rome, if that makes any sense. Like, I don't feel like I've matured as much as that journey I have taken when I started NPR to when I left working there full time. I feel like I matured through that journey far more drastically than I did in the 10 years since leaving Rome.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think your 20s, I mean, you've just become an adult, when you're 20. You're still pretty much a kid. And I just think the road between 20 and 30, yeah, it's more of a learning experience. And I'm not saying you don't learn anything in your 30s, of course you do, but you're already, you're already a pretty well-formed adult by the time you're 30. Whereas at 20, you're really still a kid. You haven't lived very much.
That's true. And I didn't start NPR at 20, though. I mean, I still had to mature to getting to that point at 20. I think I must have walked through the door in my mid 20s at some point. I don't exactly know how old I was. Once I finally got hired there full time after about 2 years of working as an intern, if you can imagine. Something I don't feel like we allow today, letting people work for 2 years for free.
2 years. Free. You were an unpaid intern for 2 years?
Yes. That's how dedicated I was.
That should be criminal.
I believe it is now, but it wasn't at the time. And at the time, I was very grateful that they let me hang around so much. But by the time I got in the door and had my first real job there, I think that I estimated once that my host of the show that I was working on was probably about 51, and I was probably around 26. And just the other day we were taking a walk and I looked at him and I'm like, out of curiosity's sake, how old are you now? And he said, I'm 68. And I was like, wow. When you put it, not that he seems 68, but that it just seems like, how could it have been that so much time has passed since we started working together? That's hard to believe. But then when you think about it side by side of like all of that time I spent at NPR and then all of the time I've spent making this show, of course he's 68. It's been a lot of time.
Yeah. We talked about the sort of, we didn't go very deep into it, but we did talk a little bit on our final episode in Rome, which aired 2 weeks ago, about the weird sense of time. And I told you, I realized while we were talking that the time that had passed since you had been living in Rome and we had started the show was pretty much exactly the same time that had passed between when I moved to Rome and you came to Rome.
Yeah, so
Which
interesting.
was kind of crazy for me because once you moved to Rome, I felt like I had been there forever, you know?
Yeah, and I felt like you'd been there forever.
Yeah. I also recently realized that Aurelio has been alive for half the time that or I think now it's more than half the time that I've been with Claudio. Not the time we've been married, like since I met him. Aurelio has been alive for half the time that I've been with Claudio. And that seems crazy because I feel like we were together so long before we had him.
Hmm.
And, that he's like this recent addition to our lives. Whereas actually, no, he's been here half the time that we've been together. And that seems crazy.
Well, where it also seems crazy is that he's been around shorter than this show has existed.
Yes, that's also
So,
true.
yeah, so when you talk about like, how long or short it feels that something existed, when I think about Aurelio not even being alive when we started this, that seems. And
That
now
does kind of bring it home.
I
Yeah.
know that seems kind of crazy. And now he's one of our best guests.
He's our mascot.
Yeah, he's practically our mascot. One day I hope to pass the reins over to Aurelio and his friends, and they'll just host this show for the next 20 years. But it is interesting, though, when you think about this. How do you think about this show? Do you think of it as like an art project? Do you think of it as a job? How do you
I think of
consider
it as a job.
Yeah.
I think of it as a job, but it's also a passion project. It's both. Isn't that the ideal, to have a passion project that's your job? I do not make, as you know, of course, enough money off of this job to support myself. Not even close. But I do make something, so I consider it a job. And none of my jobs that I have support me. That's why I have 4 jobs. But it's actually, for me and my personality, I think it's perfect because I think I would be bored, and I think it would be tedious for me to have one job that totally took over my life and that was sort of all I did. I'm not that focused of a person. I think I can focus on work, but I don't have that all consuming, this one thing is my life and this one thing is what I'm going to dedicate every working hour of my life to. So it really works well for me. And I have these different aspects to my personality. I have, my sort of stay at home homebody side, which is perfect for being a writer. And I have my loving to be wandering around Rome and talking to people and entertaining them, which is perfect for my tour guiding side. And then I get to have these deep conversations with you, which is my podcasting side. So it really just is, I really consider it one of my jobs and part of my identity now.
Yeah, but I think early on, and even now, honestly, from time to time, I feel like if either one of us had wavered in the dedication to, like, let's say if it was like a money motivated thing, it would have never worked because
No.
we somehow very early on started to feel obliged to keep this show going. And maybe that was me as the radio producer who, very early on thought, wow, only having to put out one show a week, that's so much easier than having to make 10 hours worth of material. But I also think that, I don't know, very early on, for whatever reason, we both decided that this was something we were going to put an extreme amount of time and effort into. The fact that it became a passion project and something that we were both invested in so quickly. I don't know what my point is. What is my point?
I think the point is just that, like, that we both became dedicated And I think we surprised each other. I think I maybe surprised you that I would be so interested in it when an audio was never was one of my passions. I do have to say, and I don't know if this happened right from the beginning. I'm not sure when it happened, but we started getting and still continue to get, obviously more now than then because we have a wider audience now, but we get feedback from our listeners. We just got a letter from someone you forwarded it to me just like yesterday saying that our show just makes her happy. And, we know that people tune in and we're part of their routine.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind of easier to keep going when you know that there are people out there really appreciating your work.
Yeah, you know what else was interesting? I was just thinking about this the other day when I was taking a walk. I was a couple of different people from the show, listeners to the show, and some of the ideas that they'd shared over the years were popping into my head that day. We also follow a great deal of our listeners on social media and such. And I was just thinking, like, gosh, it's so strange how well we've come to know people flung all over the place that we never would have known otherwise. And I know we've mentioned that on the show before, but every now and then it just sort of hits me where, I'll see Drek's granddaughter or something and think and be like, oh, what a cutie, and make a comment to him and think, if we had never started it, I would never have encountered these people. Maybe I would have on social media and been like, what a cutie, but it wouldn't have been, it would have been just random. It wouldn't have been a person that you encounter over and over and over again, or even with the live meetups, all that stuff. I mean, that's not to say that there haven't been moments, I think, that we, probably particularly me, thought we should throw in the towel on this show just because it is so much work. I don't know. Have you ever had that moment? Do you remember when I came to Rome in 2018 and I basically had the come to Jesus moment with you that was like, if we can't change the workflow of this show, I can't do it anymore. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do now that you mention it. I'd forgotten.
Yeah, because you were super busy. I think Aurelia was much littler. You had a full-time job. I was also trying to make a living back home. And I remember giving you this whole list of things that we needed to do to like up our game and hopefully get more financial support and hopefully maybe get a nice advertiser or two or whatever it was. I forget what was all on the list, but it was a lot. And you looked over the list and you said, well, I could probably do this one. And
One.
yeah. And it might have been a big task. Like a lot of them were really big tasks. That's the other thing about this podcast is like, I always feel slightly behind on it task wise. But I remember you saying, well, I could probably take on this one, but I don't think I have time for any of the others. And I remember saying to you, if you don't have time for any of the others, then I'm going to kill this show.
I don't remember you being so blunt about it.
Yeah, and then you were like, well, let me look it over. Because at that point because, getting anything started is hard. Keeping anything going is hard. And at that point, I kind of felt like I am now basically doing this as a full-time unpaid job. Like I'm back to being a full-time unpaid intern. Like
right.
if I have to also have time to pursue things that are paying. And, you looked over the list and really took on quite a bit more of the items on that list. And therefore,
okay, good. I've blocked out a lot of this. I mean, I kind of remember that conversation. Was it on my couch? Were we sitting on my couch?
No, we were at a shop having tea by your work. I think that picture you have of you kissing my cheek and me looking at the camera. You can post it along with this show if you want. I believe we took that after that conversation. And I believe what you wrote in the picture isn't what it says on the picture. The podcasters, what do you say? The podcasters who...
I think I wrote friends who podcast together, stay together.
Stay together, yeah. It was a foreshadowing, perhaps. But yeah, that's the only time I remember us, or at least I kind of officially saying something about the fact that I thought we could not maintain it at this particular pace. Sometimes I still think that's the case. Like if I ever get to a point where I need to pick up like a really grueling full-time job where I just don't have the mental energy. But who can say? I mean, I've squeezed editing this show into the weekends before and like evenings too.
Yeah,
So
I mean, do you remember when you worked for Town Hall? We used to tape when you were on your lunch break, was it? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
because it
totally.
was noon for you, and we were always taping when you were there at Town Hall,
Oh, that's right.
and
Yeah. Yeah, how funny. And that was lucky because that job just happened to be a job where I worked into the night. Like I usually had to be there till at least 7:30 p.m., if not later. And so my day started later. So you and I would
okay.
often talk when I had just arrived at work or
Mm-hmm.
maybe wasn't working yet, but I was already
Mm-hmm.
there. Yeah, that job was super convenient. Like, what if I had a normal full-time job? I mean, what would
I
we
know.
do? We'd have to
I know.
tape all weekend or something. But anyway, I've also always found, I was just talking with another artist recently. I think I told you I took an art class this summer. And did I tell you
Yes.
that? I don't know. Drawing class.
Yeah, yeah.
And have since gotten to know the teacher of that drawing class. I've been working on with him on a different art project. And we got into a big conversation about art versus money. And he was saying, I've never made art because I was motivated by money. And I said, yeah, that's exactly the same as I am. Even when I worked for NPR, I had my paychecks direct deposited and paid very little attention to it. Yeah, I needed the money to pay the rent, but I didn't, get to payday and check to make sure every dime was in there. It was sort of, as long as I had enough money to pay the bills, I wasn't doing it for that reason. I was doing it for a multitude of other reasons. Same holds for this show. But I asked him, I guess, but doesn't money to you like at least mean validation in some way? Like the fact that people want to give you a paycheck for something that you're making? He's like, no, I don't think I've ever really thought of it that way. And I guess that must be my Protestant upbringing or something, because for me, it's not like I do it for the money, but the money is it's like a thumbs up. And I so wish I could get past that. I mean, do you have any of that? Like, what's your thing?
Um, I don't think I've made that connection.
Like, for instance,
No.
when you were writing your book versus when your book was published or somebody bought it, did you feel like something was different in there? That, like, the fact that they gave you this advance and were like, I'm going to put out your book, gave you the thumbs up that you're like, I've spent all of this time, 7 years or whatever, working on this book and somebody paid me for it. Thank the Lord.
Kind of, but not really, because when you get a book advance, unless you're Michelle Obama, it is not, it's like if you were to take the number of hours that you spent working on that book and divide it, or take the advance and divide it by the number of hours you spent working on the book. I mean, it's probably not even $1 an hour.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's really, I can't look at it that way. For me, it was much more a validation that it was the name, it was HarperCollins. That to me was more than the amount on the paycheck, was that somebody, a publishing house that well known and that prestigious, wanted to invest, because it's not just the money they're paying me, it's the money that they're putting into the book, that
Mm-hmm.
they were willing, that they thought it was good enough, that they thought it was going to make them a profit, that they were willing to, I mean, but then I guess money is involved in that too, because they clearly are motivated by their bottom line. They're a corporation. All corporations are motivated by the bottom line. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yes and no. I would say it's not, for me, it's not really about a dollar figure. Like, I would love to be filthy rich. Like, don't get me wrong. But how much I'm making for my work doesn't, I don't think, correlate to validation. I think it's more of like, when I won a writing prize, that was a huge validation for me. Or, I was on the LA Times bestseller list for one precious week. These are the kinds of things I think that give me the validation.
Yeah,
So more symbolic things, I guess.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. For me, it's certainly separated from the motivation.
Me too. Absolutely.
Yeah, but as I was saying to him too, because we were recording this conversation because he's going to do some kind of animated short out of this long, sprawling conversation we've had. I don't know what he's going to pick, but we covered a whole bunch of different topics. And I said, but don't you also say, if you can say like money isn't any kind of validation, it's never motivated me, is basically what he was saying. And I said, yeah, but you draw a picture and people pay you for it. People don't think of radio in the same way, you know? People donate to NPR, but they don't think of it as an art form necessarily. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think the fact that people pay him for his art could be a byproduct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's definitely something that will start to happen if you're dedicated enough and talented enough and promote yourself enough, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it doesn't mean, just because he is paid for his work doesn't mean that that was his motivation.
No, I don't think it was his motivation, but it's hard to say that it has no correlation. I don't know, but maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know. We're going into the weeds here. I was just curious, just because we were just talking about art versus money. And I think that most artists, well, I can't say that, but many artists, I feel, money is not the driving factor. It's almost like your life is the driving factor.
Yeah, I think you could safely say most artists are not driven by money because, I mean, if you were driven by money, why would you waste your time with art? It's such a long shot. And most people, even extremely talented people, barely scrape by with their art. If you were really motivated by money, like if money is the most important thing for you, you are going into finance or you're going to start your own business if you're creative enough, the type of business that is designed to make a lot of money. I think that's what you do if you're motivated by money, or you're a con man, a con woman. I think there are plenty of writers out there and probably other artists too, but there's probably plenty of writers who dream about the huge book deal and the movie deal and all of that. But I don't think that is what motivates you to sit down at your keyboard and actually do the work.
Yeah, I think that's true. Do you think that in the Renaissance, when painters, for instance, were being sponsored by princes of the church, do you think that their motivations would have also been purely art? Or do you think at that point, being an artist seemed like a much more lucrative thing from your knowledge of history?
I would say that being an artist was a lot like being an artisan. You were skilled. They were, up until really the time of like Michelangelo, you're really a skilled laborer. That's how artists were really considered until really like the high Renaissance. So I think that you're going to do what you need to do to survive. Most artists were not of the noble classes, and the levels of society or the classes of society were so inescapable back in those days. For the most part, there are a few rare exceptions to that. But, if you're born poor, you're going to be poor. If you're born as a laborer, or you're born as a merchant, you're probably going to stay that way. So it's like, what do I have to do to continue my way of life and to make sure that I stay at this level? And, if your father is a cabinet maker, that's what you're going to do because you know how to do it and you know that you can make a living at it and maintain your standard of living. And artists, of course, were not necessarily the sons of artists, but they knew that they could make a living. If they were good enough, they could make a living. But it wasn't about becoming massively wealthy. A couple of artists did, but even among the best working artists of the day, I think the ones who really made bank on it were rare.
And do you think it had anything to do with making a name for yourself, like having your name last through history? Or do you think that is a more modern concept also, like trying to create some sort of ongoing legacy?
I think that was part of it. I don't know. I don't think it was until the Renaissance, though. In the Middle Ages, they didn't sign anything. Everything was for the glory of the church, at least in the Western world. But once you get to Michelangelo, and I mean before him too, probably, but I mean, Michelangelo was obsessed with the idea of leaving behind a body of work, what he called a body of work, a really, really big creative output that would survive him and that he would be remembered by.
All right, well, we have to leave it there. But before we go, I want to read you, Tiffany. I'm going to open this book. I'm holding a book in my hand here. It's a very beautiful book. It's a cloth-bound, mustard yellow and gold colored book covered in birds and little vines. And I'm going to open it to page 10 since we're kicking off our 10th season, and I'm going to read you the very first line.
Okay.
Now, you might already have some insight into the book this is, but I'm going to have you guess what book this is from this line. This is a quote. "Now, Kitty, you may cough as much as you choose," said Mr. Bennet. And, as he spoke, he left the room, fatigued with the raptures of his wife.
I do know a book you're reading from, Katie, as you know that I know. But even if I didn't know, I would recognize that line.
Okay.
If the character names were not in it, I might not recognize it. But Kitty, Mr. Bennet, it's clearly Pride and Prejudice. You know, if you've read Pride and Prejudice, you probably recognize those names.
It is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Tiffany, do you want to explain what edition this is that I'm reading from? The gold cover with the fabric?
This is the Penguin cloth bound collection. It's a beautiful collection, which probably a lot of our listeners are familiar with, at least just from seeing me post about it. But they're so gorgeous. It's a collection of, I think they're up to about 85 titles right now. They're designed by Coralie Bickford Smith. They're all just exquisite. The colors or schemes are beautiful. The design always has some kind of subtle connection to the book. So because I adore this collection so much, and because Pride and Prejudice is one of my all-time favorite books, I thought that we could give away this book, which has never been read, to one of our lucky listeners.
That's right. And let me tell you, Tiffany suggested this idea while I was in Rome. And on May 12th of 2022, both of us signed it in Rome.
Oh my God, I forgot that we did that.
Yeah, you don't remember the inscription, but some lucky Bittersweet Life supporter is going to know. But we both signed it. And this is no small book when I'm holding up. This is like a tome here. I carried this thing across the world back to the United States, thinking it would be easier to mail it to somebody from here rather than from Italy, which is so true, given the Italian postal system. It added so much weight to my bag. Thank you so much. But as a result, we've decided that we are going to give this to one lucky supporter of the show during the month of September 2022. If you donate $5 or more to the show, we're going to throw everybody's name into the hat that donates $5 this month. And we're going to draw a winner, and I'm going to mail this copy to them.
So this is open to anyone in the world who, like we said, supports the show, $5 or more. We have a couple of different ways for you to donate. Probably the easiest way is on PayPal. We will include a link in the show notes, but you can find donate buttons all over our website, thebittersweetlife.net. If you can't figure out how to do that, just email us or write to us on social media. We're also on Patreon. If you're not familiar with it, what would you call that, Katie? Like a subscription donation? I don't know.
I mean, it's a way to subscribe to the show for $5 a month or more, but you donate every single month rather than just
and you get lots of prizes, though. You get lots of access, lots of extra content, 2 bonus episodes a month, all sorts of fun stuff.
Yeah,
live meetups.
Yeah, and in fact, we were just talking. So International Podcasters Day or International Podcast Day, I don't know. It's a made-up holiday, but we're going to celebrate it. It's on September 30th this year, which is a Friday. And so we were thinking that for all monthly donors, we would host another live meetup on Friday the 30th to celebrate International Podcast Day. And of course, to record an episode of this show with a whole group of people, which is always so much fun. So
yeah, we've done it twice now, and it really is just such a fun time.
Yeah, it's a fun way to watch the show, but also to contribute your thoughts and comments to it as it's going on if you want to. You can also be silent and just watch if you want, but super fun. So we thought we'd do a gathering, and that would be something that everybody who is a monthly donor or a one-time mega donor will all be invited to this Friday, the 30th. But the main takeaway, if you want to throw your hat into the ring to get this book.
It is a beautiful book.
Yeah. Donate $5 a month or more. during the month of September. And we'll throw your name into my grandfather's wedding top hat, and you just might be the winner. Tiffany, perhaps I can take some pictures of this book and you can post them online to go along with this episode so people can check it out on social media. Just look for the Bittersweet Life podcast.
And Katie, I don't know if you remember this, but I actually underlined one of my favorite lines of the book. And I think I wrote underneath it, this is my favorite line, in pencil, by the way.
Yes.
In pencil.
So you can erase.
If you can erase it if that bothers you. If you do get this book and you read it, you will find that little note in there.
It's a special edition, so it has a whole section on further readings that you could do if you end up loving this book, and the influences of how this book came to be. And I mean, it just has all these like added little features, commentaries on each one of the chapters. So it's a fun, beautiful little book. We should leave it there. And until next time, this is The Bittersweet Life. I'm Katie Sewell.
I'm Tiffany Parks.
Join us again. Bye.